Chapter 1. The Undefeated Blade. The morning fog clung to the cobbled streets of Peldorf like a second skin, cold and wet and unwilling to lift even as the sun rose behind it. The city, nestled along the Teufel River, stirred slowly from slumber. Traders prepared their stalls, street urchins darted like rats through alleys, and chimney smoke began to curl into the gray air. But none of that mattered. Not to the crowd gathering before the dueling square. Sir Reinhardt Vael stood at its center, still as a statue, his left hand resting on the pommel of his sheathed estoc. His armor gleamed despite the murk, a tailored cuirass of blackened steel inlaid with golden trim, showing no sigil or house, for he bore allegiance only to his name. His face, clean-shaven and cold as cut marble, betrayed neither nervousness nor anticipation, only certainty. Across from him, the challenger spat onto the stone, rolling his shoulders. Kurtz Rivenmaw, a grizzled mercenary captain, who'd once broken a man's skull open with a backhanded swipe of his hand and a half-sword, now eyed Reinhardt with the wary tension of a predator, sensing a deadlier beast. The crowd, hundreds strong, pressed closer. Nobles whispered over perfumed handkerchiefs. Beggars clung to fences. A boy clutched his father's coat and asked, "Will the knight win again?" There was no trumpet, no grand announcement. The city knew better. This was not theater. This was ritual. The moment came like a thunderclap without sound. Reinhardt moved first, no flourish, no warning, just sudden, fluid violence. His estoc hissed from its scabbard like a striking serpent, a blur of motion, and the tip found the gap beneath Kurt's gorget before the older man had even stepped forward. Steel kissed flesh. The mercenary choked mid-step. His mouth opened, not in protest but in confusion, as though his lungs had forgotten how to breathe. Reinhardt withdrew his blade with a soft, sucking noise, red slithering down the narrow shaft. Kurtz dropped to one knee. His hands clutched his neck, but there was no scream, only the bubbling of blood. He toppled sideways. The crowd was silent for a moment, awestruck. Then the cheering erupted, loud, manic, worshipful. But Reinhardt heard none of it. He turned from the corpse and flicked the blood from his blade with a practiced motion. He said nothing. He always said nothing. That made it worse. At dusk, he sat alone in the taproom of the Black Sow, boots kicked upon the corner of the hearth, the warmth of the fire washing over polished greaves. He nursed a goblet of red wine that tasted too sweet and too thin. Victory had long since soured on his tongue. A serving girl approached with another tray of drinks, eyes wide with the mixture of awe and fear Reinhardt had grown used to. He didn't meet her gaze, only nodded once, and she scurried away. "Another fine duel, sir," came a voice from the shadows beside the fire. A man in a brown cloak, hood low, face lost to dimness. That makes... How many now? Record 117. Reinhardt answered flatly. The stranger gave a low whistle. "Not a single loss?" "Not one." "Then you must be bored." The voice was slick, like oil across water. It curled through the air, too smooth for the room's warmth. Reinhardt raised an eyebrow. "Say what you mean." The figure leaned forward just enough for the light to catch his mouth. Thin, colorless lips pulled into an amused smile. "There are whispers of a swordsman who walks by moonlight alone. One who accepts no coin, gives no name, and bears no reflection." Reinhardt stared. Wine forgotten. A ghost story. The smile did not fade. "Perhaps, but those who seek him do so for one reason, to see if their steel is sharper than legend. You, Sir Vael, seem like a man unsatisfied by mere flesh and blood." He should have laughed. Should have told the man to piss off and taken another duel in Meissen or Überschreck. But something twisted in his gut, something old, something feral. The part of him that had once taken up the sword not for glory or coin, but because he hated losing more than he loved anything else. "Where?" he asked quietly. The stranger dropped a piece of folded parchment onto the table. When Reinhardt looked up again, the man was already gone. That night, he opened the paper by candlelight. There was no map, just a name. Schwarzheld, a forgotten village on the edge of Sylvania, near the place folk refused to speak of once the sun went down, near the border of nightmares. Reinhardt smiled for the first time in years. A duel worth dying for. All worse. Chapter 2. A whisper in Wurtbad. Wurtbad stank of smoke and rot. The city sat like a bloated toad on the edge of Sylvania, squatting at the border of the known world and the whispering dark that lay beyond. Here even the trees leaned away from the horizon. The wind came cold from the east, carrying with it the scent of grave dirt and rain. The people kept their eyes down and their doors bolted at night. In Wurtbad, nothing good walked after sunset. Reinhardt Vael arrived at dawn, his cloak slick with dew and the blood of a highwayman who'd made the mistake of thinking he saw a noble ripe for robbing. The man's corpse was strung across a thorn bush a mile down the road, throat sliced cleanly through. Reinhardt hadn't bothered to search him for coin. There was no pride in it. He rode a black mare named Vex, lean and well-fed, hooves silent on the wet stone streets. He passed shuttered homes and broken statues, crumbling walls, and the occasional lantern flickering above a red-painted doorway. Wurtbad was a city of lost glories. The Empire might claim it, but its soul had long since been bartered for safety and superstition. He dismounted in front of the gallows drum, an inn named for the sound of its wind-battered sign and the creaking scaffold that still stood in the town square. A drunkard hung beneath it now, rotting, split open by crows, one boot missing. The barkeep, a broad man with missing fingers and a squint like old scars were pulling his eyelids taut, said nothing as Reinhardt entered. The fire was lit but weak, more smoke than warmth. A few sour-faced locals nursed their breakfasts in silence, each giving Reinhardt a single glance before quickly returning to their bowls. He made no introductions. He never did. Room. Ale. And any tale's worth the time of a swordsman, he said. The barkeep snorted. Depends if you're after coin or curses. Reinhardt placed a silver coin on the bar, then slid another beside it. The second one was blackened, etched with the symbol of Mor, the god of death, a signal not of worship, but of readiness. The barkeep's brow twitched. Then you're not here for trade. No, Reinhardt said. I'm here for truth. The barkeep hesitated, then nodded toward the far corner where a man hunched in a ragged fur coat, eyes glassy with drink and something deeper, the slow erosion of the soul. He cradled his tankard like it was a holy relic. Ask Garrett. He saw it and lived. Garrett reeked of old sweat and sour wine. His voice was a rasp, like gravel dragged across a church floor. You want to know about the Duelist, he whispered, more to his drink than to Reinhardt. He's not like us, not anymore. Reinhardt leaned in, his expression unreadable. Doesn't eat, doesn't speak. Wears no colors, no crest. Just black. Cloak like smoke and a sword so thin it cuts the air itself. I saw him gut 3 men like pigs in the orchard near Woldsmann's chapel. They didn't even scream, just fell, their insides pouring out like soup. Members of the because they asked, Garrett said, blinking slowly. They wanted to test him, just like you. Reinhardt said nothing, but his fingers tapped once on the table, a habit he thought he'd broken. Not nerves, focus. Where? He asked at last. Schwarzheld, Garrett whispered. Last place before the trees turned to graves. He's been seen near the ruins there, but you'd be a fool to follow. I've been called worse, Reinhardt said. Garrett reached across the table and grabbed Reinhardt's wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong. "You don't understand," he said. "There's no duel, no winner. He doesn't fight, he ends." Reinhardt pulled his arm free. His expression didn't change, but his eyes had sharpened. That night the inn was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that held its breath, like the whole city was waiting for something to pass. The hearth fire hissed and cracked. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the crooked chimneys and broken shutters. Reinhardt sat by the window, oiling his blade. The Estos gleamed even in the dim candlelight, long, narrow, a weapon made for puncturing armor and killing quickly. He had named it Vow. The only thing he trusted more than his own will. A child screamed in the distance, then was quickly silenced. He did not look up. A woman passed beneath his window moments later, barefooted, her dress soaked with mud, her face pale. She moved too smoothly, too slowly, like something was carrying her limbs rather than her own strength. When she looked up toward him, Reinhardt flinched for the first time in years. She had no eyes, just empty sockets, black as coal, weeping something that was not blood. And she was gone. In the morning, he rode out of Wurbad with no farewells. The guards at the east gate gave him a wide berth, one muttering a prayer to Sigmar under his breath. One of them spat in the dirt and muttered, "Another fool for the Pale One." As the road curved into the mist-cloaked trees of eastern Stirland, Reinhardt kept his hand near the hilt of Vael. The air was colder now. The birds no longer sang. The trees stood too still. The road was beginning to forget the light. And Sir Reinhardt Vael, undefeated swordsman of the Empire, rode toward the edge of the world, in pursuit of a man who bore no reflection and left no survivors. Chapter 3. The Duel with No Dawn. The trees opened like curtains, their twisted branches pulling back to reveal a clearing drowned in moonlight. Reinhardt stepped into the glade, boot heels sinking slightly into the wet moss. A low mist slithered across the ground like a living thing, coiling between roots and curling around gravestones, old, half-buried things covered in crawling ivy and the white powder of decay. The forest around him had long gone quiet, as if the very beasts of the wood had agreed not to speak of what was to occur here. His horse, Vex, had refused to come closer. The moment they neared the border of Schwarzheld, her ears flattened and she bucked, eyes wide with terror, froth spilling from her mouth. Reinhardt had dismounted without protest. A loyal beast could only go so far into the realms of death. Now he stood alone. His breath left his mouth in ribbons of frost. The moon overhead was unnaturally large, glaring like the eye of a corpse god, painting everything in shades of silver and sorrow. Then from the fog he came. Lord Aurean did not walk, he arrived. One moment the glade was empty, and in the next the noble stood 20 paces away, still as a monument, cloak fluttering as though caught in a breeze no one else could feel. He was tall, impossibly so, and draped in a long coat of velvet black, its silver lining catching the moonlight like fish scales. His skin was alabaster, flawless and dead. His hair hung down like strands of snow, framing a face that seemed both ageless and ancient. But it was his eyes that stopped Reinhardt cold. They were not red. They were not glowing. They were simply wrong. Twin voids, too deep for thought, as if each glance peeled back something vital from the soul. The duelist in Reinhardt felt his fingers itch, not from fear, but from need. A challenge. And finally, Lord Aurean said nothing. He simply drew his blade, a rapier long and thin as a whisper, with a hilt of twisted onyx and a guard that looked like a rose wrought in thorns. He held it casually, loosely, as if it were an afterthought. Reinhardt bowed once, shallow but proper, then unsheathed vow. The hiss of steel was clean, sharp. The mist recoiled around it. Neither man spoke. Then, movement. Nice. Too fast. Reinhardt barely saw it, a flicker of black and silver, then a blur of motion so unnatural it made the air itself scream. Aurean was suddenly there, not 20 paces away but breathing distance, blade flicking out like a serpent's tongue. Reinhardt twisted, deflecting with the flat avow, sparks flying as metal kissed metal. He lunged. A textbook riposte, his favorite opening. Aurean vanished. No, not vanished. He moved, flowing sideways like spilled ink, the mist parting around him. Reinhardt's strike cut only empty air. Then a cold presence was at his side. Aurean struck. Reinhardt caught the blow, barely. The rapier slid along his blade and scraped his pauldron, slicing through the leather strap. Blood welled from a thin gash under his arm. The duel had begun. Steel rang through the night, echoing through the trees like bells for the dead. Reinhardt pushed forward, footwork perfect, each strike delivered with surgical precision. Cuts, thrusts, feints, all met with Aurean's inhuman grace. He did not fight like a man, he danced like shadow. Every step seemed to carry him just out of reach, and when he struck, Reinhardt felt the sting of steel in places he could not see. A cut to the thigh, another to the ribs. He bled. The moss drank hungrily. Reinhardt snarled, parrying a blow and countering with a brutal elbow to the vampire's face. Flesh connected with bone. A crack. Aurean reeled back. Ben smiled. It was the smile of a predator indulging a cub. "I see you," the vampire whispered, voice like silk on a knife edge. So proud, so certain, so mortal. Reinhardt lunged again, ignoring the pain. He drove Vael forward with all his strength, aiming for the heart. Aurean didn't move. He let it come. The tip pierced through fabric, through bone. But there was no blood. The blade hit something cold, something empty, and stopped. Aurean's hand gripped the hilt before Reinhardt could withdraw, crushing the guard like soft tin. His other hand seized Reinhardt's throat, lifting him from the ground like a doll. The air vanished from Reinhardt's lungs. His feet kicked against nothing. Aurean leaned in. His breath was colder than death. "You fought well, but this is not a fight." He hurled Reinhardt across the glade. The impact was brutal. Reinhardt crashed into a gravestone, splitting it in half, ribs fracturing with a crack that echoed through his body. He lay gasping, vision spinning, the taste of blood hot in his mouth. Vael lay feet away, broken at the hilt. Its blade snapped from the force. Defeated. For the first time. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate, silent against the moss. Aurean stood over him, eyes unreadable. "Do you wish to die, Reinhardt Vael?" The swordsman spat blood. "I'd rather it than serve." Aurean crouched, placing a cold hand on his chest. "You misunderstand. I don't want a servant. I want a successor. I have watched you, your rage, your pride, your hunger. All of it is wasted in mortal flesh." He leaned in. "But I can make it eternal." Reinhardt's body trembled. Not from fear. From the edge of death. From the unbearable thought that this might be the only worthy foe he would ever find. And he had lost. Aurean offered his wrist. Pale, veined, elegant. The scent of it was intoxicating, sweet and bitter, like wine laced with ashes and power. "You may die here, forgotten by time," Aurean said softly, "or take the blood kiss and become something greater." Reinhardt stared at the wrist, teeth clenched. Pain bloomed in every nerve. His bones felt hollow, his pride screamed. But his heart, his furious, burning, relentless heart, beat once more. He said, the taste was fire, and the night swallowed him whole. Chapter 4. Bound by the Kiss. The world had narrowed to a pulse, and one heartbeat, then another, slower, weaker, each one dragging him farther from life. Reinhardt lay on the cold earth of the glade, his back against shattered stone. The stars above swam like drowned eyes through the mist. His armor was dented, slick with blood and dew. The broken blade of Vael lay beside him, its jagged edge catching the moonlight like a mocking grin. He could no longer feel his legs. The air burned when he tried to draw it. He was fading into the same silence he had sent so many others. His shadow moved over him. Aurean knelt beside him, composed, unhurried, immaculate. There was no wound on the vampire's chest where the estoc had pierced him, not a single mark. His expression was that of an artist surveying a masterpiece nearly finished. "You fought beyond yourself," Aurean murmured. "Few men ever touch the edge of what they are." Reinhardt tried to speak, but his throat produced only a raw croak. Pride forced his eyes open, forced him to glare up at the figure that had undone him. "End it." Aurean tilted his head. "Ooh, Reinhardt Vael, do you still think death is yours to command?" He extended his hand. Between his fingers, dark veins glimmered faintly beneath translucent skin, veins that whispered power, ancient and slow. "Your life burns bright," Aurean said, voice as smooth as silk dragged across steel. "But it wastes itself. I can keep the flame. I can bind it, refine it, if you allow me." Reinhardt's visions swam. He thought of the duels, the faces, the endless parade of victories that had filled his years. Every one of them meaningless now, every triumph forgotten. He was dying in the dirt, and the world would not remember the name Vael. His lips shaped the only word he could form, yes. Aurean smiled, not kindly. The smile was an executioner's acknowledgment. So be it. He pressed his palm to Reinhardt's chest. There was a low hum, like the air itself being drawn inward. The world dimmed around them, the moonlight curdled. From the vampire's hand spread a chill that sank through plate, through flesh, through bone, down into the marrow of the man beneath him. Reinhardt gasped. Every vein in his body seemed to ignite and freeze at once. Aurean bent close. His voice was a whisper against Reinhardt's ear, soft and precise. "Your heart will beat once more for me." Then pain, cold, searing, endless, burst through him. The vampire's mouth touched the hollow of his throat. It was not a wound, but a brand of will, a mark that drew the blood up and out in a single, impossible surge. Reinhardt's back arched, the forest spun. The stars shrank to pinpricks of white fire. When he fell still, the night was utterly silent. Aurean rose, watching. His own eyes glimmered faintly, not red but a color too deep to name. "You live," he said. "In part." Reinhardt opened his mouth to speak and found no breath, yet somehow he spoke, words forming without air. "What have you done?" "I have spared you the finality of mortality," Aurean replied, "but not its memory. You will remember hunger, exhaustion, pain, yet none will free you. Your blood answers mine now." He gestured, and Reinhardt's body obeyed without thought, dragging itself upright on shaking limbs. The broken bones no longer hurt. They simply moved where they were told. His pulse fluttered faintly in his ears, a dim echo rather than a rhythm. The scent of earth filled him. Every sound, the flutter of a bat, the distant sigh of wind through leaves, rang sharp, unnaturally clear. But beneath it all, deeper than hearing, there was a whisper. Aurean's voice, steady and calm, pulsing through the veins he now owned. "Come," it said. "Your life belongs to the court now." Reinhardt tried to resist, to step back, to claim the body that was once his. The effort was like pushing against a tide. For a heartbeat he managed to hesitate, then the will of his new master tightened, unseen but absolute, and he moved forward. They left the glade together, the vampire gliding like shadow, the swordsman following, not fully alive, not yet dead. Behind them, the mist folded shut. The broken sword sank into the moss, and where Reinhardt's blood had fallen, nothing grew again. He did not sleep that night. He merely endured, half awake, half alive, while the taste of the blood kiss lingered like iron and snow on his tongue. Chapter 5. Court of Shadows. The path to Castle Velmire wound like a scar through the blackened heart of Sylvania. Reinhardt remembered little of the journey. It was not sleep that claimed him in the coach, nor unconsciousness. He sat in velvet darkness, his body unmoving, his eyes open but unseeing, watching the world pass through frost-rimmed glass. The trees were skeletal, limbs clawing at the pale sky. The earth was slick with mildew and rot. Birds no longer called in these woods. Even the crows, those gluttons of the dead, had abandoned this place. He sat across from Lord Aurean, whose posture was regal, still as carved obsidian. The vampire's eyes never left him, not in scrutiny, not in malice, but in a silence that gnawed at the soul. It was the gaze of something so ancient it had forgotten the shape of time. When the carriage finally stopped, the door swung open without a knock. Mist billowed in. Then came the castle. Castle Velmire rose from the bones of the land like a broken crown, perched upon a jagged cliffside overlooking a dead river that shimmered with sickly moonlight. Towers clawed at the clouds, their spires crooked, their banners shredded by centuries of wind. Ivy choked the lower walls, climbing like a noose toward the crumbling gargoyles above. The stone was black, not with paint or ash, but with age and memory, as if the fortress had absorbed the darkness of everything it had ever housed. As Reinhardt stepped from the coach, the castle watched him. Not metaphorically, he felt it. Eyes without bodies, attention without source. Like the walls themselves remembered what it was to feast. Aurean led him up the path. The gates creaked open on their own. Behind them, the courtyard teemed with the unnatural. They did not rush to greet him. That would be gauche. They waited. Lined in silent rows along the balconies and parapets were dozens of figures, some tall, some slight, all clad in silks, chain, or bone-white finery. Vampires, each more grotesque and beautiful than the last. Some bore faces like porcelain masks. Others had let age devour them into walking nightmares. Faces stretched, jaws too wide, eyes sunken into eternal hunger. And they stared at Reinhardt. Whispers coiled through the air like smoke. "A living one? Doing Lord Aurean has brought him here? Bold his eyes. He resists. How quaint." They stepped aside as he passed, as if for ceremony, or the smell. The doors to the great hall opened, revealing a corridor lined in blood-black carpet and gold-veined stone. Every torch flickered with green flame. Paintings, ancient and baroque, watched with oil-slick eyes. One, impossibly large, depicted a banquet where the guests feasted not on food, but on chained men and women. A toast of red wine, no, not wine, was raised toward the viewer. At the end of the hall, the throne room waited. Velmire's throne was not of gold or carved wood, but twisted iron and shattered bones, those of knights, wolves, and men. Above it, the ceiling vanished into darkness. No stars, no sky, just black. Aurean took the throne in silence. Reinhardt was made to kneel, He felt it, not from command, but from the blood inside him. It obeyed. The court gathered. A woman descended from the shadows, her dress made of raven feathers and her hands covered in rings of human teeth. Her hair floated as if under water. Her gaze scraped Reinhardt's soul like broken glass. "Is this the one?" she asked. "The blade who would not bend?" Aurean's voice echoed from the throne, calm as a funeral bell. "He is bound, and yet unbroken." Laughter, dry and cold, rippled through the court. Another voice answered, higher, shriller, a hunched figure with no eyes, only sockets that wept black tears. "Break him, then. Let him serve in chains." Aurean raised a hand. Silence. "It will not be broken. He will learn." A soft murmur. One vampiress leaned forward, a smirk curling her crimson lips. "Or he will die screaming." Aurean turned his gaze to Reinhardt. "You stand at the edge of eternity, Reinhardt Vael. Here, time does not pass. Here, pride is either weapon or poison." Reinhardt met his eyes. "Then I'll find which it is." Aurean's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He gestured. Servants entered, not living ones, but silent, hunched things with sunken skulls and rotted mouths sewn shut. They bore cloaks, armor, a scabbard of silver inlaid obsidian, Reinhardt's new garb, a gift, a leash. He was paraded through the great hall, and the vampires clapped, not with joy, with anticipation. He was not guest, not kin. He was curiosity, the Lord's favored pet. And Castle Velmire, in all its shadowed grandeur, had just tasted its newest game. Chapter 6. Hunger and Chains. The castle had no day. Sunlight never reached Castle Velmire, not through its high glassless windows, nor across the rotting cliffs it called home. Its walls devoured light, the very stone thirsty for warmth it could never remember. Even the torches burned pale and strange, casting shadows that refused to follow natural laws. Reinhardt awoke in a chamber that wasn't his. He didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he had stood at the edge of the grand hall, still wearing the silver thread cloak they had forced on him, listening to the court's slithering laughter fade into the gloom. The next, he was on a massive, decaying bed beneath velvet sheets that smelled of lavender and rusted iron. The mattress was soft, too soft, like it had molded to the shape of something far larger and colder than him. His armor had been removed. His sword, not vow, but a ceremonial blade, unused, lay propped against the wall. He rose, and the hunger hit him. It came like a tide at first, a slow swell rising in his gut, nothing more than a strange emptiness, like having forgotten to eat or drink for too long. But by the time he crossed the room, it had blossomed into something far worse. His stomach did not growl, his throat did not ache. It was his tongue that betrayed him, dry, rasping, curling against his teeth as if tasting the air for prey, and it found none. No scent of bread, no hint of wine or meat, only blood. He could smell it in the stones. He staggered, gripping the edge of a carved pillar. His hand left a smudge of sweat and... Was that something darker? He sniffed. Yes. His own scent was different now, not rot, not yet, but soured, like wine left too long in the cask. The door opened. A servant stood there, not a vampire, but something less, a thrall perhaps, or a husk. His eyes were milky white, lips stitched with delicate copper thread. The creature bowed and beckoned silently. Reinhardt followed. He had to. Each step felt like a choice denied. His muscles obeyed with sluggish reluctance, not from fatigue, but from binding. The blood kiss had rooted itself in his limbs. He could no more refuse Aurean's commands than a dead man could refuse the grave. He passed through twisted corridors lined with mirrors that reflected only the empty hall behind him. His own image was faint, blurred, as though beneath water. At times it vanished altogether. That, more than the hunger, unsettled him. When they reached the feeding chamber, he understood why the path had wound downward. It was not a dining hall. It was a kennel. Dozens of humans, thin, pale, glassy-eyed, sat or lay upon the stone floor, some twitching, some whispering prayers to gods that did not answer Castle Velmire. Iron collars circled their necks. Some had dried blood caked on their wrists from where they'd tried to claw the shackles loose. All of them were alive, and all of them were food. Aurean waited at the far end of the hall, standing beside a young woman who trembled as he stroked her hair, like one might soothe a frightened pet. "She's yours," Aurean said simply. "You're first." Reinhardt's hands clenched. He didn't move. Aurean's voice, soft and calm, threaded into his skull. "The hunger will not fade. You may resist for a day, 2, but it will own you in time." The girl whimpered. Reinhardt stepped back. Aurean's eyes glowed faintly now. "This is not about cruelty. It is necessity. You are not a man, Reinhardt. Not anymore." "I still breathe," he rasped. Aurean tilted his head. "Not for long." The words struck harder than any blade. Reinhardt's vision swam. His body felt suddenly wrong, nerves on fire, joints aching, his mouth filled with the taste of copper. His tongue burned against his teeth, and he knew what would come next. He turned from the girl, fell to one knee, gripped the floor so hard his nails cracked. The hunger rose again, a scent of blood in the chamber. Her blood, his blood, blood soaked into the very flagstones, became overwhelming. It wasn't want, it was need, like drowning and seeing air just out of reach. He wanted to scream. Instead, he heard Aurean's voice inside his mind. "Feed, Reinhardt, or die." A moment later, the girl cried out. She wasn't dead, not yet, but he had crossed the distance without thinking, without seeing, without deciding. His lips were on her throat, his arms locked around her shoulders. He pulled away before it went too far. She slumped, gasping, her skin white as frost. Reinhardt backed into the shadows, wiping his mouth with a shaking hand. His knees buckled. Aurean smiled faintly. "You learn quickly." The court would hear of this. They would mock him. Some would call it weakness. Others would call it progress. But Reinhardt knew what it truly was. Bondage. Not chains of iron, but hunger. Servitude written in his blood. Pride buried beneath the weight of a thirst he could not kill. He returned to his chamber in silence that night, guided once again by the eyeless servant. His reflection in the mirror was gone, and in his dreams, red drowned everything. Chapter 7. Games of the Damned. The great hall of Castle Velmire had once been a place of imperial splendor. That was evident even now in the bones of its design, the vaulted ceilings painted in long-faded frescoes, the towering arched windows where stained glass once told tales of ancient victories, and the grand chandelier suspended from chains blackened with centuries of soot. But now the hall was a theater of ruin, and tonight it hungered for blood. Reinhardt stood at the far end of the marble floor, beneath one of the statues that lined the walls. Statues of knights and warlords, of kings and tyrants, their faces weeping blood from stone eyes. The scent of iron and ash hung thick in the air, mingling with incense that masked the stench of old death. The vampires of Velmire had gathered in force, seated along balconies and terraces in velvet-draped lounges, sipping from goblets filled with warm, pulsing crimson. Their eyes shimmered with anticipation, not for music, not for speech, but for violence. Not true battle, no. This was theater, a brutal, decadent performance, a mockery of valor. And Reinhardt had been cast. "Tonight," came the silky voice of Lady Vesraut, one of Aurian's most serpentine courtiers, "we host a duel of taste, the old against the new, flesh against ruin, breath against decay." She floated across the dais, barefoot, her gown of translucent silk barely hiding the patches of scaled skin beneath. Her voice was an instrument, high, lilting, cruel. With a flourish, she extended one arm toward the center of the hall. Two massive iron gates creaked open. From one emerged a knight in rusted armor, shield split, helm dented. His eyes were dull, and his movements mechanical, not human. Not anymore. A revenant, perhaps. The remnant of a long-dead champion, dragged from his tomb to serve once more. From the other gate came Reinhardt, unarmed, no armor, only the ceremonial black duelist uniform that Aurean had given him, tight-fitting, high-collared, embroidered with crimson thread in the shape of bleeding roses. His boots echoed across the stone as he stepped forward, hands loose at his sides, gaze locked on the corpse, knight. The laughter from above was light and cruel. Will he run? Will he beg? Will he learn? Lord Aurean sat on his throne of iron and bone, silent. His expression was unreadable. A servant approached Reinhardt, kneeling, and presented a weapon, a rapier of silvered steel, slim and cold, its grip wrapped in serpent skin, new but balanced, crafted for him. He took it without thanks. A distant gong sounded, not a clash of metal, but a deep, tolling chime that rolled across the room like thunder in a crypt. The knight moved first. It lunged with inhuman speed, mace raised. Reinhardt sidestepped, narrow as a dancer's twirl, and struck once, the rapier slipping through a joint in the armor, glancing off cracked ribs. Not enough. Not deep. The thing turned. Faster than it should. It swung wide. Reinhardt ducked, rolled, slashed across the exposed thigh. Sparks flew. The crowd hissed with glee. Show us his spine. Gut him. Make him sing. Reinhardt didn't hear them. Not truly. His focus narrowed. He was in the duel now, a place of rhythm and instinct, where time slowed and the edge of a blade became the only truth. But his opponent felt wrong. There was no pulse, no breath. It did not hesitate, did not fear. It was a meat puppet with ancient rage in its bones. And it hurt. The mace clipped his shoulder. Reinhardt staggered, bones jarring, blood welling beneath his tunic. He dropped to one knee, pain flaring through his spine. The revenant raised its weapon for the killing blow. Then Reinhardt surged upward. His blade darted in a savage upward thrust, not elegant, not beautiful, but lethal. It drove through the rusted gorget, into the throat cavity, angled sharply, and burst through the back of the skull with a crack of splintering bone. The knight twitched, then collapsed. The hall erupted in cheers and cruel laughter. Reinhardt stood over the corpse, chest heaving, blood on his lip and blade. He turned slowly, looking up at the gathered predators. Lady Vesra clapped, slow and deliberate. "Oh, he learns." Later that night, he fought again. Not one match, but 3. A bestial creature with tusks and manacles. A blindfolded swordswoman who moved as if possessed. A pair of starving ghoul brothers with knives strapped to their fingers. He won each. But with each victory came pain. Broken ribs, a gashed forearm, a torn muscle in his thigh. They offered him no healing, only time, only hunger. After each duel, a servant would present a chained mortal. Reinhardt would resist, and then he wouldn't. He told himself it was survival, that feeding was tactical. But deep in the pit of his soul, he felt something worse. Satisfaction. Not in the feeding, not yet, but in the fight. He liked the edge, the risk, the way every duel peeled him raw and forced him to adapt. These weren't contests of strength. No brute could survive long in Velmire's halls. Here they prized cruelty, timing, style. Reinhardt watched the court closely between matches. He learned who plotted, who whispered, who waited to betray. He learned that power here was not taken with blades, but with spectacle. By the seventh duel, the courtiers no longer laughed at him. They studied him. Aurean from his throne never smiled. But one night, as Reinhardt drove his rapier through a vampire spawn's heart in a perfect downward thrust, their eyes met. The Lord gave the faintest of nods, and Reinhardt knew he was being sculpted. Not merely tested, he was becoming. Chapter 8. The Pale Lady's Bargain. The nights in Velmire never ended, they simply deepened, one bleeding into the next, until time itself became a sickly, indistinguishable thing. Reinhardt had lost count of how many duels he had fought, or how many screams he had silenced beneath his blade. The laughter of the court had dulled into a constant haunting hum, the sound of ancient predators amused by their own eternity. He was no longer a guest, nor a prisoner. He had become entertainment, refined, a spectacle of blood and grace that the undead nobles savored like fine art. Yet, though his body obeyed Aurean's will, his mind had begun to stir against it. Pride, that stubborn ember within him, refused to die. But pride alone could not break chains woven into the soul. And so when she came to him, Reinhardt almost mistook her for another of his fevered dreams. She arrived without footsteps, her presence whispering into the chamber like a new scent, roses drowned in snow. "Sir Reinhardt Vael," she said softly, her voice like glass being turned in the hand. He turned. Lady Elsbeth stood before him, tall, statuesque, wrapped in a gown of pale silk that shimmered faintly with each movement. Her hair fell like spilled moonlight across her shoulders, and her skin was so white it seemed carved from candle wax. Yet her beauty was wrong, too precise, as though sculpted by a craftsman obsessed with perfection rather than life. Her eyes, a deep violet shade, regarded him not as a man, but as a curiosity she intended to dissect. "Lord Aurean's favorite hound," she said with a faint smile. "The half-born, the knight who still breathes though his heart belongs to another." Reinhardt said nothing. He was standing by the window, looking out over the black cliffs where the mist swirled like a restless sea. The reflection in the glass showed her clearly, yet his own form flickered, ghostly, fading at the edges. "What do you want?" he asked. Her smile widened. "To offer you freedom." He turned to face her fully now. The hunger in him stirred, not just for blood, but for meaning. "Freedom," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue, a word without weight in this place. "Oh, it has weight," she said, gliding closer, "especially for one who still dreams." Her perfume was faint, lilac, but tainted by something metallic. Her gaze drifted over him like a touch. "Aurean has made you into something unique, half alive, half dead, neither thrall nor kin. It must torment you to feel your heart beat while your soul lies in his grasp." He didn't answer. "You are bound to him by the blood kiss, yes," she continued, circling him slowly. But the bond can be undone. Reinhardt's eyes narrowed. Nothing he gives is undone. Not easily, she agreed, but I know a way. She stopped behind him, so close he could feel the chill radiating from her skin. Aurean has a firstborn child, his eldest creation, sired in an age before this castle ever knew stone. The creature still walks among us, hidden, wearing civility like a mask. If one were to bring me that child's heart, still beating, I could perform the rite to sever the bond that binds you. Reinhardt turned sharply. You lie. Elsbeth's smile did not falter. I rarely need to. And if you're wrong? Then you will die free, instead of living as his shadow. There was silence, only the whisper of the wind beyond the window, and the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling. Reinhardt studied her carefully. You gain nothing from freeing me. What do you truly want? Her expression changed, just slightly. Something darker glimmered beneath her composure. What I want is older than you, Duelist. Aurean has ruled this court for centuries, and in his arrogance he forgets that eternity is not loyalty. His bloodline festers, and his eldest offspring is the key to his dominion. Cut out that heart, and you wound him. You would have me commit treason? He said. She leaned closer, lips near his ear. You are not one of them. You are a weapon he forged to amuse himself. Why not choose your own hand to wield? Her words coiled in him like smoke. He could feel the pull of her will, subtle, coaxing, but not the absolute command of Aurean. This was temptation. And if I refuse? He asked. She smiled again, this time with fangs barely visible. Then you will spend what remains of your mortal years dancing for his court, drinking from his trough, killing for their applause, until one night he tires of you, and then he will finish what he began. The hunger flared again, cruel and sudden, and Reinhardt staggered. He could feel the blood within him stirring, answering to Aurean's distant call, even as another, fainter whisper, Elsbeth's, crept beneath it. Careful, she murmured, stepping back. He feels it when you resist. He steadied himself against the wall, breathing hard, though his lungs no longer truly required it. If I do this, he said at last, voice low, and if your words are truth, you will break the bond. I will give you what he denies you, she said. A choice. Freedom from him, or the full gift of what you were promised. I can make the transformation complete. The thirst would be yours to command, not his. Offer me both. Because I wish to see what you choose, she said, eyes gleaming. To see what remains of the proud night when the leash is gone. Will you remain a man, or embrace the monster that's already waiting beneath your skin? She reached into the folds of her gown and produced a small silver dagger. The blade was etched with runes that writhed faintly in the torchlight. When you have the heart, cut it free with this. It will know my name. Reinhardt took the dagger. The metal burned faintly in his palm, not pain exactly, but a sharp, cold sting that felt like acknowledgement. When he looked up again, Elsbeth was already retreating into the shadows. Her voice lingered after her, a whisper carried on a breath of chill air. Find him, Reinhardt. The eldest hides where the court's laughter dies, beneath the stage of their little games. And then she was gone. Reinhardt stood alone, the dagger glinting in his hand, the scent of her perfume fading. Beyond the window, lightning danced far across the mists, briefly illuminating the castle's many towers. In that moment he understood the truth of Velmire's court, that every word, every smile, every gesture was a blade drawn in secret, and he was about to draw his own. Chapter 9. Masks and Murder. Castle Velmire pulsed with music and madness. On the third night of the blood moon, the great masquerade began, a tradition older than the Empire, older than many of the beings who now drifted through its torchlit halls in garments of gold, bone, and shadow. The Feast of Masks was no celebration, not truly. It was a theater of deception, of unspoken power, where every smile concealed a dagger and every dance was a ritual of dominance. The scent of perfume mingled with the iron tang of blood. Candles burned with black wicks, their flames the color of old bruises. Mirrors had been veiled, not out of modesty, there were none here to cast reflections, but to drown the hall in mystery. Reinhardt entered wearing a mask of plain silver. No animal, no teeth, no horns. Just a faceless plate of polished metal, smooth and cold. Around him spun wraith-like figures in lavish costumes, some cloaked in living serpents, others naked beneath silken veils soaked in wine-dark stains. The music was a waltz, performed by a quartet of chained musicians, their fingers worn to the bone, mouths stitched closed to keep them silent as their instruments screamed. The rhythm was maddening, a heartbeat with too many limbs. And somewhere in this swirling nightmare of elegance and rot moved Sir Caldric. Reinhardt had watched him for nights, a tall, lean figure with a swagger born of violence and indulgence. Caldric was once a knight of Everland, turned by Aurean in an age when the Empire was still whole. His eyes were gold now, predatory and sharp. His mask was a wolf's face, wrought from melted iron and lined with rubies. He moved through the party like a favored son, exchanging nods, trading secrets and whispers Reinhardt couldn't hear. But tonight, Caldric was prey. Elsbeth's dagger lay hidden in the lining of Reinhardt's sleeve, its weight impossible to forget. It whispered to him with every step. It wanted blood. Reinhardt had waited, watched. He knew Caldric's rhythm now, how he drank from the same servant girl every time she passed, how he lingered too long beside Lady Vestra's throne to provoke Aurean's eye, how he always circled the grand staircase before descending to the lower halls when the evening's games soured into slaughter. He found him beneath the chandeliers, locked in conversation with two robed figures whose faces were entirely wrapped in funeral bandages. Caldric laughed, a sound like gravel dipped in honey. His voice had a melodic cruelty to it. Reinhardt approached. "Sir Caldric," he said, inclining his head. His voice was flat, almost courteous. Caldric turned, teeth flashing beneath the wolf mask. "Ah, the mongrel!" His voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear. "How fares the leash?" Laughter rippled around them, brief and hungry. Reinhardt tilted his head. "Tighter than yours, perhaps, but at least I remember what I was." Caldric stepped closer, his breath heavy with blood wine. "You know nothing of what you are. Aurean made you to dance, not to think." Reinhardt didn't move. "You still bleed, Caldric." Something flickered in Caldric's gaze. "Then make me." He moved. No fanfare, no applause, just sudden violence beneath silken banners and music. Reinhardt ducked the first strike. Caldric drew a dagger from beneath his cape, carved from obsidian and edged in spite. It nicked Reinhardt's cheek, a shallow cut, but enough to remind him that pain was still real. He twisted, driving a shoulder into Caldric's chest, pushing him through the crowd. Masks turned. Some clapped. Others vanished into mist to give them space. They crashed into the lower gallery, a side chamber filled with broken statuary and dried blood pools. Here, away from the pageantry, the court hunted. And now they watched from the shadows, bedding, whispering. Caldric lunged again, faster now. His blade hissed past Reinhardt's neck, barely missing. Reinhardt countered. Elbow, knee, twist. He slammed Caldric against the wall, pinning him. "I know what you are." Reinhardt hissed. "Elspeth told me. You are the oldest childer. The chain." Caldric snarled. "She lies. She schemes. You're just a blade she sharpened." Reinhardt drew the silver dagger. Caldric's eyes widened. "That blade?" Reinhardt plunged it into his side. Caldric screamed, a raw, ripping sound that cut through the chamber. Blood poured from the wound, thick and black, stinking of old magic and rot. The vampire thrashed, clawing, biting. His fangs grazed Reinhardt's throat. Reinhardt drove the dagger upward, through ribs, through sinew, and into the heart. It pulsed once beneath the steel, then burst. The silence that followed was absolute. Caldric's body went rigid, his hands trembled, and then he began to crumble, not like dust, but like ice, splintering from within, limbs cracking, skin flaking. His mask fell away, revealing a face that had once been noble, now locked in horror. Reinhardt watched him die, watched something in himself shift. A drop of Caldric's blood landed on his lip. He did not wipe it away. He tasted it, and he wanted more. It was not forced, not commanded, not driven by Aurean or Elspeth, or even the hunger. It was his. For a brief moment he understood the thirst, not as a curse, but as a weapon, sharp, clean, eternal. He stood over Caldric's remains, nothing more than black ash and torn velvet now, and turned back toward the door. Above, on the upper balconies, the court had gone silent. Watching, Lady Elspeth smiled. Lord Aurean was gone, and the dagger in Reinhardt's hand hummed with cold triumph. He had killed one of their own, and he was still breathing. Chapter 10. Mirror's Edge. The castle's corridors were alive with whispers. Not voices, not truly, more like the echoes of movement through old stone, the sigh of dust stirred by unseen hands, the brush of silk against air where no body passed. Reinhardt could hear them now, more clearly than ever. Since the masquerade, since Caldric. The night after the duel, Aurean's court did not celebrate. They did not mock, they merely watched. Wherever Reinhardt went, the shadows seemed to follow, bending closer, tasting him. He could feel them even now as he walked the narrow hall that led to his quarters, the air thick with damp and the scent of ancient rot. The sconces guttered as he passed, their pale flames bowing inward, drawn toward his wake as if he consumed their light, and his boots left no sound. He only noticed that once he stopped walking. The chamber was colder than usual. The servants had removed the bloodstains from the floor, but the scent of iron still lingered. Reinhardt stood in silence, his cloak falling from his shoulders, and crossed to the far wall where a tall mirror leaned between two pillars of cracked marble. He had stolen it weeks ago from one of the abandoned wings of Velmire, a remnant of mortal craftsmanship, its silver backing tarnished and spotted by time. He had kept it for one reason alone, to remind himself he still was. Now he wasn't so sure. The reflection looked wrong. Not gone, not yet, but drifting. His edges were blurred, as if the air between glass and flesh had thickened. The color from his skin had leached away, leaving him pale and ashen. His eyes, once blue, had turned the shade of stormlight, dark at the edges, rimmed faintly in red. He blinked. The image lagged, a fraction of a second behind. It moved as he did, but a heartbeat too slow. A ghost of his gestures, a mockery of motion. He stepped closer. The delay remained. And then, for a breath, the reflection smiled before he did. Reinhardt stumbled back, heart pounding, though it should not have mattered. The pulse that remained in him had no rhythm, no warmth, yet fear, true fear, still knew his name. He gripped the edge of the table, eyes fixed on the mirror. His reflection stood calm now, mimicking him perfectly again, as though nothing had shifted. But he had seen it. The blood kiss was changing him. Not just his flesh, but the part of him that watched. He drew in a slow, shaking breath. "Show me," he whispered to the glass. For a moment, the room answered. The air rippled. A low hum spread through the stones, not sound, but vibration, like the echo of a plucked string running through the marrow of the world. And then he saw her. The mirror darkened. His reflection bled away into shadow, and in its place appeared the figure of Lady Elspeth, standing behind him as though in the same room, her violet eyes gleaming through the haze of silver. "You've begun to understand," she said, her voice carrying through the glass like a memory. "The blood kiss is not a chain, Reinhardt. It is a door." He turned, but the room was empty. Only her image remained in the mirror, her words weaving through his mind. "Aurean told you it bound you to him. It does not. It binds you to the threshold, between life and death, between will and submission. You walk its edge now. The question is whether you will cross, or be closed out forever." The mirror rippled. Her face vanished. Reinhardt stared at his reflection again. It stared back, its gaze hollow. The days that followed bled together. He fought when commanded, fed when ordered, drifted through the halls like a restless specter. But he was no longer the same. He no longer slept, not truly. His dreams had become visions of rivers of red, of voices whispering through water, of hands reaching from behind glass. Sometimes, when he looked upon the court, the vampires' faces would blur, melting into one another, their mouths moving, their laughter disjointed, as though the world itself were beginning to unravel around him. At other times he could feel Aurean's will tugging at his thoughts, a distant hand, always there, threading through his veins. Yet between those tugs, between the moments of servitude, there were instants of clarity, of silence, freedom. They came more often now. One evening Reinhardt stood on the balcony above the courtyard, staring into the black fog that rolled endlessly below. It was said that the mist beneath Castle Velmire was bottomless, that it was not air at all, but a wound in the world that never healed. He stared long enough to see faces in it, faces of those he'd killed, those who had screamed his name once as they died. He touched his chest. The heart still beat, faintly, the rhythm slow and alien. "You feel it, don't you?" The voice came from behind him, Aurean's. Reinhardt did not turn. "The edge," Aurean said, "that trembling between what you were and what you will become." Reinhardt's jaw clenched. "You mean the slow death you call rebirth?" Aurean stepped beside him. His reflection, too, was absent in the glass doors that opened onto the balcony. The vampire looked outward, eyes glimmering like faint embers. "The blood kiss is no death," he said softly. "It is revelation. You cling to breath, to heartbeat, to hunger, as if they are proof of being, but soon those things will seem as trivial as dreams. When you finally cross the threshold, you will understand that there was never a man to begin with, only what you are now." Reinhardt met his gaze. "And what if I choose not to cross?" Aurean smiled faintly. "Then the door will close, and what remains will rot between worlds, neither mortal nor eternal, a shadow of both. A failure." He placed a hand on Reinhardt's shoulder. It was like being touched by moonlight, beautiful and unbearably cold. "Choose wisely, my duelist," Aurean murmured, "for your reflection fades faster than you think." Then he was gone. The air where he had stood was colder, still humming faintly with his power. Reinhardt turned back to the mirror inside his chamber. It no longer showed him at all. Only darkness, and deep within it, faint, far away, a pair of eyes stared back, watching him from the other side of the glass. He could not tell if they were his own. Chapter 11. The Lord's Favor. The Hall of Silverspire had not been used in centuries. Once it was a place of coronations and declarations, of oaths sworn beneath the star-etched vault. Now it stood forgotten, veiled in dust and ivy, hidden deep within the eastern wing of Castle Velmire. Even the other vampires avoided it, for the light there did strange things. It refracted, bent, and moved like it had its own mind. And yet, tonight, that long-dead chamber pulsed with life once more. Aurean waited beneath the shattered spire, cloaked in midnight silk, his eyes gleaming like candlelight through wine. Behind him, the ancient stained glass of the vaulted dome glowed faintly, the red of dying suns and pale gods staring down from a fractured sky. At his feet, the black carpet rolled forward like a tongue, guiding Reinhardt to his appointed place. Reinhardt entered slowly. He wore the same duelist's garb the court had gifted him long ago, now worn through from battle, darkened by blood that never fully washed out. He stood taller than he had weeks ago, stronger. His steps were quiet, but they carried a weight they hadn't before, a tension in the air, as though something inside him walked alongside. Aurean did not rise. He regarded Reinhardt with the calm of a god sculpting his final creation. "You came." Reinhardt's mouth was set in a hard line. "You summoned me." Aurean's smile was a small thing, barely a twitch of the lips. "Summoned? No, I invited." "There is a difference, Reinhardt. One you would do well to learn." He gestured to the dais where two chairs sat, one of black stone, throne-like and heavy, the other simple, unadorned, carved from ashwood. "Sit," he said. "We are not enemies tonight." Reinhardt remained standing. "Say what you brought me here to say." Aurean rose with the soundless grace of the dead. He walked slowly, deliberately, circling Reinhardt like a painter considering the canvas from every angle. "You have killed, bled, danced for the court, and yet you remain intact. Not whole, no, you've been broken many times, but reforged, sharper, less human." Reinhardt turned, meeting Aurean's gaze. "And you think that makes me ready to kneel?" Aurean stepped closer. "I think it makes you ready to choose." He extended a hand, not as a command but as an offer. "The blood kiss you received was incomplete. A leash, yes, but also a seed. I planted it in you not to bind you but to test you, and you have grown into something worthy, something rare." Reinhardt's jaw clenched. "You ask for loyalty, then," he said. "A collar instead of a chain?" Aurean's eyes gleamed. "I offer you succession." Silence. Reinhardt stared at him. "You mean to make me your heir," he said flatly. "To rule Velmire." "To rule more than that," Aurean whispered. "Velmire is a tomb compared to what waits beyond its gates. The Empire is dying, Reinhardt. The old bloodlines weaken. The mortals forget the lessons of darkness. But you, with my blood in full, could walk into the light and reshape it. Not as a monster, not as a man, as something new." Reinhardt stepped back. "You want a weapon," he growled, "not an heir." Aurean moved like mist, suddenly, silently, placing a hand on Reinhardt's shoulder before he could react. "I want choice," he said. "We have all played this game too long. The court is full of rotting minds in eternal masks. Elspeth plots, Vesra poisons, Caldric was a disappointment. But you resist. That is not weakness. That is strength untempered. And I can give you the fire to forge it fully." Reinhardt shook him off. "And what price comes with that fire?" Aurean's gaze was almost gentle now. "You would lose what's left of your heartbeat," he said. "You would feed by choice, not compulsion. You would cease to pretend at being human." Reinhardt stared up at the stained glass dome above. One of the panes had shattered long ago, leaving a jagged void through which the stars blinked cold and distant. The wind moaned faintly through the cracks, not loud but constant. "I'm not ready to become what you are," Reinhardt said. Aurean nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but you are no longer what you were either. The edge narrows. Every night you delay, the door closes further." He turned, walking back to the throne of black stone. When he sat, the shadows seemed to lean inward. "You will be given time," Aurean said. "Not forever, but a taste of it. Until the next moon wanes, the offer stands. Then you choose." Reinhardt stood still for a long moment, then bowed shallowly, coldly, a swordsman's nod, not a servant's, and left. That night he returned to his chamber and stared into the mirror again. Nothing stared back. Not darkness, not Elspeth, not his own face, just emptiness. Yet somewhere deep within his bones the blood chest pulsed, and beneath it something older stirred. Not submission, not even hunger, temptation. Chapter 12. The Forbidden Duel. No one issued challenges in Castle Velmire. Not truly. Not anymore. There were duels, yes, endless theater, carnage played for court amusement. But true challenges, defiance, those had not been seen in centuries. Perhaps not since the walls were fresh and Aurean's blood still sang with the thrill of conquest. So when Reinhardt stepped into the center of the grand hall beneath the 13th bell toll, bearing steel drawn and eyes dark with purpose, the court fell silent. Aurean, seated as ever upon his throne of twisted iron and ivory, regarded him with a stillness so perfect it seemed carved from the air itself. His court, the lean predators, the silk-draped monsters, the withering nobles of blood, turned in unison, pale faces blank, fangs hidden but near to showing. No one spoke. Then Reinhardt did. "I challenge you, Aurean," he said, the words steady, sharp, like the first bite of winter air. "Not as your servant, not as your heir, as myself." Whispers rippled through the court like insects beneath silk. Aurean remained seated. His fingers drummed the armrest. 1, 2, 3, then stopped. "You presume much," he said softly. "I presume enough," Reinhardt answered. "You ask me to choose. This is my answer." Aurean rose. It was like the moon shifting behind a storm cloud. The weight of his presence grew, pressing against the stone, filling the chamber with something older than fear, something inevitable. "Then let this be written," he said, "not in decree, in blood." They faced one another in the center of the grand hall. The torches dimmed, one by one. The court ascended to the balconies, forming a circle of silent witnesses above the blood-marked floor. The air grew colder. The stone beneath their feet shuddered faintly, as though some deep thing had begun to wake beneath the foundations of the castle. Aurean wore no armor. He did not need it. He wore a simple doublet of gray silk, open at the throat, showing the pale marble of his skin, untouched, ageless. Reinhardt wore what he always had, his duelist's garb, frayed at the sleeves, darkened by old wounds. At his hip, a new blade, ashbane, forged from Caldric's melted dagger and tempered with alchemical rites known only to Elsbeth. He held it in silence, waiting. Aurean extended his hand. With a sound like breathing steel, a sword of pure black iron unfolded from the air itself. It shimmered with runes that pulsed once, then dimmed. The duel began with no signal. Aurean moved, not charging, not advancing, but arriving suddenly, with inhuman speed, blade aimed directly at Reinhardt's heart. The force of the strike was enough to send cracks through the floor. Reinhardt twisted, barely deflecting. The clang of blades meeting was deafening, echoing off the stone like the toll of a funeral bell. The force drove Reinhardt backward, boots sliding across the marble. He came back with a feint, low, then high, then a spinning parry that would have disarmed any mortal man. Aurean caught the blade between two fingers. He'd pushed it aside like it was nothing. Reinhardt struck again, faster, harder, a flurry of blows that left after-images in the air. Steel screamed, sparks danced, blood sprayed, as one blow opened Reinhardt's shoulder, another carved through his thigh. He ignored the pain. The blood kiss burned within him, not submission now, but power. He let it guide him. Let the hunger drive his movements beyond thought. He struck true, the tip of Ashbane slicing across Aurean's chest, tearing through silk and biting into the immortal's flesh. Black blood welled. The court gasped. Aurean looked down at the wound, then at Reinhardt. He smiled. For the first time. A real smile, one full of amusement, approval. "Good," he said. Then he vanished. Not moved, not blurred. Vanished. Reinhardt spun, too late. Aurean appeared behind him, blade flashing, a line of agony tearing through Reinhardt's back. The force sent him crashing to the ground. His sword clattered across the floor, ringing once before stilling. Reinhardt rolled, coughing blood. Aurean's shadow fell over him. "You are not ready," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. Reinhardt spat. "You're afraid." Aurean raised a brow. "That I'll win," Reinhardt growled. "No," Aurean said. "That you'll become me." He raised the blade. Reinhardt closed his eyes. But the strike never came. Instead, cold fingers gripped his chin, lifting his face to meet Aurean's gaze. "Not yet," the vampire whispered. "There is more of you to kill, and more of me to shape." He released him, and walked away. Above them, the court erupted, not in cheers, not in laughter, but in silence, a reverent stillness. For the first time in 1,000 years, Aurean had been bloodied in combat, and Reinhardt had survived. Broken, beaten, but not bowed. Chapter 13. Crimson Betrayal. The night began with stillness, the kind that came before the breaking of something sacred. Rain lashed against the towers of Castle Velmire, hissing as it struck the black stone. Lightning forked across the sky, bathing the cliffs and spires in white fire before retreating back into the void. The storm had been building for hours, yet the castle seemed to breathe with it, as though the thunder were its heartbeat and the wind its breath. Reinhardt sat in his chamber, sword across his knees, eyes on the dying embers in the hearth. The duel with Aurean haunted every thought. Every strike, every word, every heartbeat since had replayed in his mind, growing sharper with each recollection. He could still feel the echo of Aurean's hand lifting his face, that look of triumph and disappointment mingled, like a father judging a son. The wound on his back still burned, though the flesh had already sealed. That was the gift and curse of the blood kiss. Pain lingered not in body, but in memory. A knock came at the door. Soft, almost hesitant. He rose. When he opened it, she stood there, Lady Elsbeth, pale and exquisite in a gown of deep carmine, her eyes luminous against the candlelight. "You bleed power now," she said, her voice smooth, coiling. "Even he feels it. You've taken more of him than he intended." Reinhardt stepped aside. "What do you want?" "To end the game," she said simply, gliding inside, "before Aurean ends us all." She turned, meeting his gaze. He grows weaker. The blood moon wanes, and the duel broke something within him. You saw it, the wound you dealt. He hasn't healed. You hurt him in ways no other could. Reinhardt said nothing. His jaw tightened. Elsbeth smiled faintly, her fangs glinting like daggers beneath silk. "Now is the moment, Reinhardt Vael. You hold what no other ever has, his blood upon your blade, and I hold the means to use it." She reached into the folds of her gown and withdrew a vial, small, crystal, and pulsing faintly with red light. Within it something swirled and shimmered, alive, as though it sought to escape. "What is that?" he asked. "The draught of severance," she said, "distilled from the ashes of those who once defied their masters. It severs all bonds, even those of blood." Her gaze sharpened. "With this, we can destroy him, tonight." The great hall was empty when they entered, save for the distant hum of the storm outside and the flicker of green torchlight along the columns. The throne sat vacant. The air smelled of rain and old iron. "Hell the fuck knows," Reinhardt murmured. Elsbeth smiled. "Let him." They crossed the hall slowly, every sound amplified by the silence. The moment they reached the dais, the shadows along the walls moved. Dozens of eyes glimmered in the dark, courtiers, loyal thralls, and ancient vampires stepping from their hiding places, their expressions unreadable. And then Aurean's voice. "You disappoint me, Elsbeth." He appeared at the top of the stair, cloak trailing behind him like smoke. The rain beyond the shattered windows framed him in silver light, turning his silhouette almost spectral. Elsbeth's smile never wavered. "You've ruled too long, old ghost. The court tires of silence and restraint. You keep us chained in the dark while the world outside rots. You've grown weak, sentimental even. Look at him." She gestured to Reinhardt. "Your pet. He bleeds for you, and yet he still resists. He is proof your dominion wanes." Aurean descended the steps, each one echoing like the toll of a bell. "And you would take my place?" "Already have," she said. With a flick of her wrist, she shattered the vial. The blood within exploded into vapor, flooding the air with a scent that made even Reinhardt's stomach twist. Power, thick and heady, like lightning trapped in liquid form. The runes along the hall's pillars flared to life, burning crimson. Aurean staggered, one hand clutching his chest. "You dare?" "I do," she hissed, "and I will finish what time itself has refused to." From the shadows, figures emerged, her loyalists. A dozen vampires, fanged and armored, their eyes burning with hunger and madness. The hall erupted into chaos. Steel clashed, spells hissed. Reinhardt drew his blade as one of Elsbeth's followers lunged, slicing the creature's head from its shoulders in a single motion. Another came from behind. Reinhardt turned, parried, and drove his sword through the attacker's chest, pinning him to a column. Aurean fought like a god unchained. His movements were fluid and merciless, his blade a ribbon of black fire that tore through the traitors like parchment. Yet he was faltering. The blood Elsbeth had spilled weakened him, his strikes grew slower, his wounds did not close. Elsbeth watched from the edge of the dais, smiling as she raised her hand. "Your throne dies with you." She spoke a word one Reinhardt had never heard before, and the air split. A shockwave of crimson energy burst outward, knocking Reinhardt to his knees and sending Aurean crashing backward into the throne. The impact shattered stone. Aurean rose, barely. His chest was torn open, black blood seeping from the wound. Reinhardt tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy, his body sluggish. The power in the air burned his veins. Elsbeth stepped forward, her fangs bared, her beauty warped by triumph. "It ends." Aurean looked up, not at her, but at Reinhardt. "Now," he rasped. Reinhardt didn't think. He moved. He caught Aurean as he fell, felt the warmth, the pulse of the vampire's dying blood against his palms. The smell of it filled his head, cold and rich, intoxicating. "Drink," Aurean whispered, "or you die with me." Reinhardt hesitated. Then the choice was made for him. The hunger that had haunted him since the first kiss tore free. His throat burned, his mind went white, and before he could resist, before he could even understand what he was doing, he sank his teeth into Aurean's torn flesh and drank. The world exploded. Power flooded him, not warmth, but fire and storm, agony and ecstasy in equal measure. Every nerve screamed, every memory, every heartbeat, every drop of humanity left within him burned away in that instant. Elsbeth turned, eyes wide, horror dawning too late. Reinhardt rose. The torches went out. The storm outside fell silent. The hall was swallowed in black. When the light returned, Elsbeth stood alone amidst ash. Reinhardt stood where Aurean had fallen, but he was not the same. His eyes glowed like molten gold. His skin was pale as frost. And when he spoke, his voice carried two tones, one his own, and one older, deeper, that echoed like a memory of thunder. "Not yet," he said, the ghost of Aurean's smile in his words. Elsbeth fled. Reinhardt watched her go, the taste of blood still on his tongue, and realized the truth that chilled him more than death ever had. He had not fed out of surrender. He had done it because he wanted to. Chapter 14. The New Lord of Velmire. The storm did not end when dawn came, because dawn never came. It had been 3 days since Aurean fell, and the sun had not breached the horizon even once. The mists that forever coiled around Castle Velmire had thickened into a shroud, swallowing light, sound, and time itself. It was as though the world beyond had ceased to exist, leaving only the fortress, its halls, and its new master. Reinhardt stood in the grand hall, where the air still carried the scent of scorched stone and spilled blood. The shattered throne loomed before him. Aurean's black monument of bones and iron, now cracked down the center from the force of Elsbeth's sorcery. The runes that had once pulsed faintly along its arms glowed again, flickering like embers struggling for life. And on those embers, Reinhardt's shadow sat. He had not meant to take the throne. He had only meant to survive. Yet the blood within him had other intentions. He could feel Aurean's power coiled inside his veins, a second heartbeat, ancient and cold, echoing his own. At first it had been agony. The transformation came like fire in the blood, as though every vein were being carved open and filled with frost. His lungs had seized, his heart had stopped. His flesh had burned, peeled, and knit itself anew under the touch of unseen hands. But when it ended, he had risen, different. The hunger was no longer a voice whispering in the back of his mind. It was silence, perfect, complete. The ache of it remained, but the desperation was gone. He was the hunger now. Every scent in the air, every breath of fear or pulse of life beyond the walls sang to him. His senses were not sharpened, they were absolute. He could hear the worms turning in the earth beneath the floor, could feel the heartbeats of the mortals cowering in the kitchens below. And above it all, the court waited. They had scattered when Elsbeth struck, then crept back like carrion birds when the fighting ended. Now they gathered again in the shadows of the hall, watching, measuring, hungry to see whether Aurean's fledgling would stand or fall. Elsbeth came to him at twilight. No longer the serene creature of silks and secrets, she entered barefoot, her gown torn, her once perfect face streaked with black veins from the remnants of her spell. Her eyes burned with hatred and something else. "You shouldn't have lived," she hissed. "You were supposed to die with him. That was the design." Reinhardt regarded her from the throne. His expression was unreadable, the cold grace of his new form wrapped in silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the faint echo of another, deeper, older. "You tried to kill a god," he said, "and failed." Elsbeth's laughter broke like glass. "A god? Aurean was no god. He was a coward, a relic of an age that forgot itself. You could have been more, Reinhardt. I offered you freedom." "You offered me servitude in another name," he said, rising. "And now you will offer me peace." He stepped down from the dais. The air changed as he moved. The torches along the walls flared, their light turning crimson. Elsbeth flinched, not at the light, but at the weight of it. Reinhardt's shadows stretched across the marble like an army of claws. "Do you think you're his heir?" she spat. "You're a mistake. You drank his blood, but you'll never control it. It will consume you from within." "Perhaps," he said softly, "but you won't live to see it." Elsbeth struck first. Her hands swept through the air, and a storm of black shards erupted from her palm, glass formed from the blood of the damned, honed sharp enough to slice through stone. They screamed through the air toward him. Reinhardt didn't move. He raised a single hand, and the shards stopped mid-flight. They hung, suspended, trembling, before turning in unison. Elsbeth's eyes widened. The shards struck her like rain. She screamed, a sound that shook the hall as the blades tore through her flesh and pinned her to the cracked throne. The black ichor that spilled from her veins hissed as it touched the floor. Reinhardt approached. He looked down at her, the woman who had tempted him, manipulated him, and set this tragedy in motion. She looked up through the blood in her eyes and whispered, "You think you're free now? You're not. You never will be." He didn't answer. He placed a hand on her chest, over her unbeating heart, and pushed. Her body dissolved into ash. The hall fell silent once more. The court emerged from the shadows then, slowly, cautiously, their faces pale and eager. One by one, they knelt. Reinhardt did not tell them to rise. He looked out across them, the creatures who had once mocked him, used him, called him pet and plaything. Now they bowed their heads, trembling in the presence of something they could neither predict nor control. "You kneel," he said quietly, "but not for me. You kneel for what you fear, and that fear will keep this court alive." He turned and walked to the throne. It groaned under his touch, ancient runes pulsing brighter as if recognizing him. When he sat, the glow deepened. The air in the hall stilled. Something vast and invisible pressed down from above, the castle itself, ancient and sentient in its way, acknowledging its new master. And in that silence, Reinhardt felt the last breath of the man he once was leave him. The duelist who sought perfection, the knight who fought for honor, the man who feared defeat. All gone. What remained was stillness, eternal, patient, and cold. He looked toward the shattered window at the end of the hall. The rain had stopped, but the world outside was no brighter. The sky was an ocean of gray and blood-red clouds, and beneath them stretched the dead forests of Sylvania, endless and still. Reinhardt leaned back in the throne. His voice when he spoke was soft, almost mournful. Pride, he murmured, was a mortal thing. The hall's torches guttered and died, leaving only the faint red glow from the throne's runes. And there, in the vast, quiet dark, the new Lord of Velmire sat in silence, a king of ghosts, presiding over a kingdom of ashes. Chapter 15. The Price of the Kiss. The mirror had not been moved since the night of the masquerade. It stood in a forgotten gallery high within Castle Velmire, where moonlight streamed through cracked panes of stained glass, painting the dust-choked air in hues of crimson, violet, and pale blue. The room was lined with portraits, some slashed, others warped by age, their eyes following every step with silent judgment. Reinhardt entered alone. The door groaned open at his touch, the weight of centuries resisting, then yielding with a reluctant shudder. No torch was lit. No guards flanked him. He had no need for light now. The world was as clear to him in shadow as it had ever been in day. But he had not come for vision. He had come for truth. The mirror waited at the end of the chamber. Its frame was carved from black yew wood, wrapped in the snarling forms of wolves, thorns, and skeletal hands reaching up from its base. Cracks spider-webbed its surface from a single point at the center, like a starburst of broken glass. He stood before it, and it did not show him. There was no reflection, no flicker of silver or shadow, only the room behind him, distorted by fracture and silence. Reinhardt reached out and touched the surface. His fingers met cold glass. He pressed harder. It did not yield. "I remember," he said aloud. "I remember the first duel, the first blood, the first time I held a sword not for honor but for victory." The mirror said nothing. "I thought it was pride that drove me," he continued. "Pride that kept me from surrender. Pride that gave me strength when Aurean took me." He turned away from the mirror and walked to the center of the room. But it wasn't pride. He looked up at the painted faces around him, past lords, ladies, traitors, saints, monsters. It was fear. He let the word echo. Fear of death, of being forgotten, of insignificance. He looked back at the mirror, jaw clenched. That was the first lie. The second was thinking I could resist what he made me, that I could walk the edge and never fall. His hand drifted to his chest. No heartbeat, not even a flicker. There was no warmth left in him. Only cold thought and hunger wrapped in discipline. The blood kiss had not killed him. It had revealed him. He walked to the window and looked down upon the courtyard below. The court had gathered. Dozens of them, pale, immortal, terrible. Their faces upturned toward the tower. They waited now for him to descend. To command. To rule. They would obey. Not because he was stronger, but because he was inevitable. He could feel it now, not just in his veins, but in the marrow of the castle itself. Velmire had chosen him. The stone whispered to him when he passed. The gargoyles turned their faces inward. The shadows bowed as he walked. He was not a guest of the dark anymore. He was the dark. Reinhardt descended the tower slowly, the hem of his long coat whispering across stone, his sword at his side not as a weapon but a symbol. The court parted before him as he entered the great hall. They knelt, all of them, even those who had once laughed, even those who had conspired. He walked between them in silence. He ascended the dais. He stood before the throne of iron and bone. It had been rebuilt, reforged from Aurean's ruined seat, sleeker now, sharper. Where the old had whispered of power long held, this throne promised judgment. Reinhardt turned to face them all. "I will not be Aurean," he said. "I will not rule by ancient games and half-truths." The court stirred uneasily. "I will rule with clarity, with will. You will feed when I allow it. You will kill when I command it. And if you defy me," he lifted his hand. A single vampire, one of Elsbeth's former loyalists, rose from the crowd, lifted by an invisible force, gasping, "You will vanish." The vampire screamed once before collapsing into ash. Silence fell. Reinhardt sat upon the throne. He looked out across the court. And in that moment he felt the final thread of the man he once was break. Not with sorrow, not with rage, but with relief. The duelist, the knight, the servant, the heir, all gone. Only the Lord remained. And his court of damned souls, silent and eternal, awaited his command.